All right, there you have it. The president making good on a campaign promise that he is getting out of the Paris Climate Accord that involves nearly 200 nations. He said that he looked at it every which way he could, but despite the imploring world leadership there at Pope Francis, a lot of CEOs, not all CEOs, by the way, big manufacturing CEOs, found this to be a costly boondoggle and a commitment on their part that would cost jobs and just cause them. Be that as it may, the president making clear that he is out of this club, and unless something miraculous happens, he is really not looking forward to any kind of changes that would be coming that would get him back in that club. Now, even with this commitment to bow out, the way the agreement was structured, voluntary as it was, the U.S. cannot back fully out of this until the day after the presidential election in 2020. So we're in it through then, but we're not adding to it. And I think, as Chris Wallace was mentioning earlier, the fact of the matter is, with the president's directives, a whole host of executive orders scaling back President Obama's environmental rules and regulations, which were meant to foster this push down in emission standards and the rest, it was being unwound in real time anyway. So this is not a huge surprise here, although there were some who were thinking that, given the fact that the president didn't nix NAFTA, for example, but renegotiated it, or is trying to renegotiate it, and earlier today it indicated that a campaign promise to move our embassy in Israel to Jerusalem versus Tel Aviv, and the fact that he didn't do that today, committing to Tel Aviv for now, was maybe telegraphing signs that some said that maybe he's going to change his mind on this or find a middle ground here. No middle ground. He is out, saying that he's much more interested in Pittsburgh than he is, for example, in Paris. In fact, there were a number of rather sharp references to Paris. I don't know if that is a post-handshake phenomenon with that country's President Macron, but the indications here are right now that he really doesn't care. He's out. And despite all those world leaders telling him don't even think about it, he's thought about it, he's done it, and making good on a campaign promise. It's over. Kevin Corke at the White House with more. Kevin.
Hey there, Neil. I was actually just reading some of the reaction on Capitol Hill. A number of lawmakers obviously weighing in, among them Jim Imhoff of Oklahoma, calling this a false start, a false promise from the very beginning. We also saw that Speaker Paul Ryan said, look, this was a bad deal. Rand Paul also called it a bad deal. The consensus is certainly on the right on Capitol Hill is that what the president did here was push back on this idea, this notion, Neil, that somehow you can make an executive order. This was not a treaty. Let me repeat that. This was not a treaty that was enacted with the support of the Senate by President Obama. This was an idea, an accord, an agreement, and that gave this president a chance to push back and, as you point out, slowly withdraw the U.S. from the principles of the Paris Climate Accord. You heard him repeat over and over that this was really about two things. One, not handicapping or hamstringing the American economy. And it also protects workers. That's been the White House mantra from the very outset. Does this help the American worker make more? Does it give you a better chance at a job? And his answer was definitively no. Let me share just a bit of what the president had to say today in the Rose Garden.
The United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord Thank you. Thank you. But begin negotiations to re-enter either the Paris Accord or in really entirely new transaction.
And that is also a very key element of what the president was saying today. As currently constructed, this is a non-starter. It simply doesn't meet the needs or the goals of the American people. It's certainly from the White House's perspective, and that's why he now says, look, we're willing to open the door and have more conversations about substantive change to the climate policy, but it has to be one, or certainly a series of climate negotiations that don't penalize, again, the American economy. Very interesting comments here today, Neil, and certainly, as you pointed out, No real surprise.
No,
Yeah.
I guess they thought there might be one, but it did not materialize. Kevin Corke, thank you very, very much.
You bet.
We should point out as well that 22 U.S. senators, all Republicans, including Mitch McConnell, had advised the president, this is a horrible deal, get out of it. Scott Pruitt, the EPA administrator, who you also heard, was among those saying it's a bad deal. Rex Tillerson, of course, the Secretary of State, had said it's a better idea to stay in this and get some leverage from all of that. But in the meantime, we're going to be hearing from Wilbur Ross on this, the Commerce Secretary of the United States. Secretary, if you could hear us.
Yes, I can hear you fine, Neil.
Very good to have you, sir. You know, there is some concern expressed in the global community that we just alienated ourselves. What do you say?
Well, any time that people were taking money out of your pocket and you make them put it back in, they're not going to be happy. And that's what's happening here.
Do you worry, Secretary, that this could hurt us on other trade-related matters, that if we've pushed ourselves outside of this agreement, others in Europe, elsewhere, will be leery to enter into any agreement?
Oh, I don't agree with that at all. There's no reason to link one agreement with another. The sky didn't fall when we pulled out of TPP, and the sky certainly won't fall now that we pull out of the Paris Accord. I think the president is right. He was elected by people in Pittsburgh, not Paris.
All right, you're talking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership,
Yes.
an Asian trading deal
Yes.
pact that the president said was just a waste of time. But
Yeah.
do you know how it broke down? Because you had Elon Musk, of course, founded Tesla, who said that if the president went through on this, he would quit the President's Economic Council. Others have hinted of the same. Tim Cook came down hard saying this was too important to leave behind. Who else do you fear could leave the president on that Economic Council as a result of this?
Well, I don't know about that, but I think anybody who read the agreement and understood it would realize that this was not really about climate. This was about U.S. money going to other countries, and it didn't solve the climate problem. Under this agreement, China's emissions would actually go up every single year till 2030. Similarly, India had no restrictions on building much more coal plants than they had before. The only ones who are making an economic sacrifice were the United States. That's no agreement at all.
Now, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, the former head of ExxonMobil, had argued better for us to stay in and use that leverage and just our size and wealth as leverage than to be on the outside. What do you think of that argument? Obviously, it didn't pan out for the president.
Well, I have a great deal of respect for Secretary Tillerson. I happen to disagree strong with him on this particular issue. I just don't see the connection, frankly.
Do you believe yourself, Secretary, that man is behind climate change or the slowly warming temperatures since the pre-industrial age?
Well, talking about warming temperatures, the studies from MIT showed that if we did everything in this Paris Agreement, it would only change the temperature by the year 2000 by 0.2 degrees. Anybody who thinks you can make that long-term a forecast with any kind of accuracy, I don't agree with.
All right, but do you think that the rise we've had in temperatures since then owes any connection to man?
Well, it may. I'm not a scientist, but the debate over the Paris Accord is not a debate over scientists. The debate over Paris Accord is an economic debate. The president made clear we already are far ahead of other countries in terms of CO2 reduction. And how can it be an effective deal if it lets China and India, two of the major polluters, keep increasing their pollution for another decade or two? That doesn't sound to me like a climate accord. It simply sounds like a transfer of wealth from the United States to other countries.
Now, what will it mean? You know, you're a former coal guy before coming to Washington, billionaire. I mean, do you think that industry has a shot now? Others are saying, well, it's a dying industry. It's a dying energy. What do you say?
Well, coal right now contributes about 1/3 of the entire energy supply of the United States, and it contributes a lot more than that to China. So coal is going to be around, but the difference is it'll be American coal that'll be mined. It'll now provide enough resources we can deal with clean coal. We can deal with LNG. I mean, people who were in favor
You're
of
talking about
climate
liquefied natural gas. It's a cleaner fuel. Well, that has really been propelling this cut in emissions we've seen. Do you expect that to continue?
Yes, I certainly do. It's very cheap on a BTU basis, and it's very, very much more efficient from an environmental point of view. There's no reason we shouldn't be even exporting LNG to other parts of the world. Part of the reason that China's using so much coal is they really don't have much LNG. So it seems silly that we aren't really promoting the export of LNG. And as you remember, President Obama and Secretary Clinton sat on dozens of applications to export LNG. It makes no sense. If you're in favor of a clean environment, you should be in favor of the existing cleaner fuels.
Secretary, now I know the way this works is that while we are leaving, we'll have to wait at least 3 years because this became official in 2016. And then there's an extra year for a waiting period, I guess, that would carry the formal separation to after the next U.S. presidential election, the day after it, November 4th, 2020. So does that mean, Secretary, that we are not formally and technically out of this until then?
Well, I don't know about the legal technicalities, but what the president has made clear is he intends to negotiate a new climate agreement, either by revising the existing Paris Agreement or by creating a totally new agreement, but one that is not so lopsided, that doesn't put all the burden on the United States.
Sir, we're getting word, not surprisingly, from a number of foreign leaders, the mayor of Paris, who's blasting this move. The Canadians are saying it was regrettable. I'm sure we'll get a lot more from that, from the nearly 200 participants in this agreement. Does that affect you at all in going about the job that you have to do? I mean, you're the Commerce Secretary, you're the most important company person in that administration as far as that's concerned. And if you want to do that with your foreign counterparts, that could have just been, whatever your views notwithstanding, made more difficult by this, right?
There's nobody who runs a trade surplus with us who's going to refuse to talk about trade. That's silly. That's just not going to happen. But I'm not surprised that they are opposed to it, the other countries, because they were the beneficiaries. If there was going to be billions and billions of dollars of wealth transfer from us to them, why wouldn't they be for it? They should be for it. If Mr. Trump makes a new deal, you can bet it won't be transferring American wealth outside.
Do you know whether that came into the thinking here, Secretary, where how the rest of the world feels about us even mattered? I mean, it mattered a lot to them over there, obviously, but it didn't seem a great deal with this president. And for a while with Ronald Reagan, I know in his early days it really didn't seem to matter a great deal. But what do you think? I mean, how much do you weigh relationships with the rest of the world and whether this boomerangs, whatever logic and soundness there might be in rejecting it?
Well, I think the task for the rest of the world is to mend their fences and come back and agree with us on a deal that's equitable. That's what the president wants. It's not that he doesn't want a climate deal. He wants a deal that's fair and a deal that doesn't cost us trillions of dollars of GDP and millions of jobs.
The administration's budget calls for 3% growth per annum over the next 10 years. That would seem to indicate it's possible if we could repeat whatever could be going on in the quarter we're in. Do you believe that? Do you believe that that kind of growth is sustainable of a minimum of 3%?
Oh, I certainly do, assuming that the Congress passes the tax reform, assuming that we implement the regulatory reform.
But what if that's delayed? Do you worry that they're not really moving very fast on that? Maybe they can't, but if that doesn't materialize, let's say it's delayed. What then?
Well, every day that goes by is a day that the Congress, being lackadaisical, costs American business and American workers money. It's very, very sad that just for partisan reasons they're playing that game.
Well, it's Republicans, right? Republicans. There's bickering in the Senate among just Republicans on the health care effort that you guys are trying to lead, right? So would the problem ironically be, even with Republicans in charge of the House and the Senate, to say nothing of where you are at the White House, that they don't get it done? And are you worried about that?
Well, we have yet to see the Democratic leadership do anything affirmative. Where is their plan if they don't like our plans for these things?
But no, I'm sorry, sir. I'm asking about the Republicans. If they can't agree on a plan, are you worried that they're, if you look at the legislative calendar, I mean, there isn't a whole lot of time to get stuff done, let alone bring the debt limits thing. I mean, do you think, like Secretary Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, that you should just raise it and move on?
I think that the Congress has got to get its act together. I think they will get their act together, and if they don't, I think it will be up to the voters to make changes.
Then, Secretary, does that mean, if you'll indulge me on this, that if the health care thing is delayed, obviously the tax cut thing is delayed, do you see a possibility that the tax cuts, more to the point, could be a 2018, not a 2017 event?
Well, it's very, very hard to handicap exactly the timing in the Congress. But what is clear is that every day that it's delayed is a day there's money out of the pockets of every American taxpayer and every American business, and that makes it a very sad day.
Finally, sir, you're a pretty savvy investor. That's how you got your wealth, and then you buy opportunities that others pass over or ignore or don't think are worth it. This market has been soaring since the president's election. It continues to soar even through this climate accord doubting and shelving. The Dow, again, sprinting, I think they're near record territory. I'd have to check myself on that. The NASDAQ and the S&P, though, did hit records today. Many argue the markets are factoring in they're going to get tax cuts, factoring in they're going to get regulatory relief. What if they're wrong?
Well, I think what they're factoring in is they know there's a new administration in Washington. Every day I have CEOs coming in to see me. Every single one of them says how much better he feels or she feels already. Almost every single one of them is hiring more people and is making more capital expenditures based on the confidence in the president.
All right, I lied. I had a curious question back to Elon Musk, if you don't mind. If he's leaving, and it's possible that others on the economic count or this business, corporate counts, whatever you want to call it, opt out because they're so against what the president did on this, do you have names to replace them?
Oh, there are no end of businessmen who wanted to be on that council, but it was decided to keep it a very small number. I don't think there'll be the slightest problem replacing them. Not that we won't miss their participation, but filling those vacancies is not going to be a problem.
Wilbur Ross, thank you very much, the Secretary of Commerce for these United States. Thank you, Secretary.
Thank you, Neil.
All right, as the Secretary pointed out, if anyone is concerned about any economic fallout from this, he isn't. Things that seem to be firing on all cylinders, to his point, and so to the markets, all up when the rest of the world is aghast. A little more after this.
Bird.
I was elected to represent the citizens of Pittsburgh, not Paris.
All right, well, try telling that to pro-Paris deal protesters gathering outside the White House as we speak. Griff Jenkins in the thick of it. Hey, Griff.
Hey, Neil, how are you? It's quiet out here and certainly a nice day. You see mostly tourists out here. The only thing remaining is a wake-up clock to the climate crisis, a sign here, stay in Paris agreement. But let me tell you, right at 3 o'clock when the president was withdrawing from that Paris Accord, it got really, really loud. A dozen or so protesters. You can hear from this video we shot right at the time the president was pulling out. Take a look at this tape. The protesters are a conglomerate of environmentalists environmentalist groups, and progressive groups. So you have everybody from the Sierra Club to the Center for American Progress, and their message is clear. They say, Neil, that the withdrawal is bad for the climate, bad for the planet, and also bad for business, according to the way they see things. And they're actually really outraged. One protester telling me, I said, what would you say if you could go across and talk to the president? She said, I would call him a climate loser. A play, of course, on what we saw from the president's trip overseas. And I spoke with one of the protesters that you see being taken down, that got across the police tape. Here's what David Barrows had to say. Take a listen to this.
We are outraged that this president would cook the planet, would destroy the planet. We don't know why he's doing this. If he's doing this in the name of jobs or the economy, he's insane.
So, Neil, again, there is another rally coming at 5 p.m. with some speakers. We're told that the DNC chairman, Tom Perez, will be here. He's already put out a statement saying that he believes this is a betrayal of future generations, calling it a failure of leadership. But look at it out here now, you know. There's only a few student protesters down there in front, and it's otherwise a pretty nice day. We're going to stay on watch for you, Neil.
All right, thank you, my friend. Be well. Griff Jenkins in the middle of all of that. And by the way, not surprisingly, Barack Obama has come out with a statement. This was his baby. He led the effort on this. And obviously not too pleased that it has not come to pass with his successor. He says the nations that remain in the Paris Agreement will be the nations that reap the benefits in jobs and industries created. Going on here, he says, I believe the United States of America should be at the front of the pack, but even in the absence of American leadership, even as this administration joins a small handful of nations that reject the future, I'm confident that our states, cities, and businesses will step up and do even more to lead the way. Our former ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton, on that. Obviously, he's not happy about it. We're already hearing from some of those nations that have signed on to it, nearly 200 of them, that they're not happy with it. But this was pretty well telegraphed. What do you think?
Well, I think it was an excellent decision. Look, the Paris Accord is a self-licking ice cream cone. Its purpose is to exist. In the short term, it really would have had next to no effect. The danger was in the longer term. In the short term, it's a bunch of national programs that you could have devised any way you wanted. The overall effect on climate by any reputable scientific analysis is zero. And countries like India and China basically said, our program for reducing carbon emissions will begin in 2030. So the near-term effect was remote. Why would anybody agree to something like that? Because of the failure of the predecessor agreements, Kyoto and Copenhagen. What they wanted was an agreement on anything to create the foundation for what they're really interested in, which is more international control over national decision-making. This is really a global governance issue, which the Europeans just love, which Barack Obama just loved, which Donald Trump has now rejected. There are lots of economic arguments here about the effect of this agreement. To me, the overarching, ultimately most important, more than constitutional question was, do we govern ourselves here, or are we going to cede governance authority to international organizations? And that's what's been rejected.
You know, Ambassador, regardless of people's views on this particular deal and accord, some have expressed concern that it could hurt how we work with Europe, let's say, and some of these other nations on dealing with terror, on trade deals, on that sort of thing. Are you similarly concerned?
Not at all. I mean, that just is a fundamental misconception of how international diplomacy works. We've heard these arguments before. In the Bush administration, my first job was to get us out of the 1972 anti-ballistic missile treaty. Oh my God, the Europeans said. Oh my God, Joe Biden, John Kerry, Barack Obama, Chris Dodd said, it's the end of international strategic stability. We got out, nothing happened. We got out of the statute creating the International Criminal Court. Nothing happened. And nothing will happen here either, other than people will recognize we're not going to engage in this kind of blue smoke and mirrors in order to get to more international control. I think it will cause people to say, if they're serious about this, if they want to really make a difference, then they're going to have to enter into serious negotiations. The fundamental point is we could be dealing with global cooling here. If the objective were to put more carbon emissions into the atmosphere to increase the Earth's temperature, these people would be arguing for the same structures, because their overall objective is more international governance and less national sovereignty.
Real quickly, do you think the evidence is irrefutable, as President Obama did and many of these signatories onto this deal did? You mentioned about global cooling. That was a big fear about 40 years ago on the cover of Time and Newsweek, the great freeze to come. That was the consensus then. It's a different consensus now. How do you feel about that and the science on this?
Look, I'm perfectly prepared to believe that the Earth is warming. I'm perfectly prepared to believe it's largely because of man-made causes. I'm perfectly prepared to believe it's more dangerous than not. That doesn't have anything to do with the Paris Agreement. It would not reduce carbon emissions sufficiently to have a measurable effect on global warming as far as the eye could see. They're just looking at it exactly the wrong way. The better path is to allow for economic growth.
All right. Very good having you, Ambassador. Thank you very much. And to the Ambassador's point, carbon emissions and our overall levels have gone down about 15% since this deal was first transacted, having very little to do with the deal and more to the fact that we have veered into cheaper, cleaner natural gas. And that's what closed the deal, and that's what got those emissions down, having nothing to do with an accord with the rest of the world. But we shall see the fallout from all of this with Senator Mike Lee, among others, after this. All right, Joe Biden, not a big fan of the president's move today, kind of echoing what his old boss Barack Obama had said, that this would be bad for America. That is Donald Trump nixing that climate accord that signed by close to 200 nations. He says, even in the absence of American leadership, even as the administration joins a small handful of nations that reject the future, he is confident, this is coming from Barack Obama, that this is good. But Joe Biden, I should say, not quite convinced that this imperils our security. I'm just cutting to the chase here because their statements are quite long. Tweets are supposed to be very short. All right, in the meantime, we got Utah Republican Senator, author of Written Out of History, The Forgotten Founders, Who Fought Big Government, Mike Lee. Senator, good to have you.
Good to be here.
What do you think of this reaction? It imperils our future, it's bad for our security, we've lost the faith of the world, et cetera, et cetera.
I don't see it. Look, the apocalyptic doomsday predictions that have come about as a result of this are just going to turn out to be bluster. The fact is that it's got to be Pittsburgh before Paris. That was one of the best lines of the whole speech. I absolutely loved it. It was a brilliant move. It was good messaging.
The mayor of Pittsburgh, by the way, I guess he's a Democrat, says they're going to honor that accord, and then so he wasn't a fan of that comparison. But, you know about the history of these things, and it's very unusual to walk away from an agreement, signed or not. And I'm wondering, looking back at these, way back to our earliest times, were we so focused on these kind of things? That seems to be more a recent phenomenon.
Well, we were certainly focused enough on it in Philadelphia in 1787.
But I talk, when I'm talking internationally.
Sure, but a couple of things have to be kept into account. First of all, the Founding Fathers made a wise decision not to give this power to the President exclusively. This had to be a shared power, one that required 2/3 assent from the Senate in order to be ratified. Secondly,
that didn't happen here.
No, it didn't happen here. President Obama didn't present it to the Senate for ratification because he knew the votes
just like the
weren't
Iranian
there.
deal.
Exactly. The votes were not there, so he didn't do it. But that's important to bear in mind. He doesn't have the authority to act, to bind the United States, to make it the law of the land without the assent of the Senate. The other thing to keep in mind is that in the past, treaties generally were about the law of nations, about interactions between nations. Today, we have some treaties that have become a lot about domestic policy. This one intruded sufficiently into the realm of domestic policy that it would affect the lives of a lot of people. That's why it made sense to say Pittsburgh before Paris. Thinking there, of course, not about government and elites, not about the mayor of Pittsburgh, who might not be supportive, but of the hardworking men and women who make up the Pittsburgh middle class. Those are the people he's looking out for.
Democrats, Senator, and President Obama, more to the point, have taken a bow for the cut down in emissions that were going way ahead of the agreement already. Now, I follow this stuff fairly closely, being one of the nerds here at Fox. That has much more to do with, our veering into cleaner, cheaper natural gas, what have you. And that could continue, deal or no deal with our foreign counterparts.
It has.
What are your thoughts?
Everything to do with that. Everything to do with innovation, with changes in technology, which have occurred quite notably outside of the context of any international agreement mandating it. Moreover, we are a nation that abides by the rule of law, much more so than many of the counterpart countries involved in this agreement. If we bind
China's
ourselves
one
to
of
it,
them, and the fear is that China is going to try to take advantage of this and kind of, take a leadership role with Europeans who might be disenchanted with us.
As opposed to what? As opposed to entering into an agreement that suspends any obligation on the part of China for a pretty long number of years before any of their obligations kick in.
So you think they're just making hay of this?
Well, yeah, and this is not a good deal for the American people. This is a bad deal, and that's why the president did the right thing by pulling us out of it.
The health care thing, the tax thing, I was talking to Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary. He's getting a little fidgety about Congress and moving on any of this stuff. Are you?
No, I'm convinced that we're going to pass health care reform and tax reform this year. We've got to repeal Obamacare. We've run on it for 7 years. If we don't, it's going to be very bad because we've run on this. The president ran on this. People in the House and the Senate campaigned on this for 7 years. We have to repeal it, and we've got to move forward and deliver relief to the American people who are suffering under the yoke of this incredible burden thrust upon them by the Affordable Care Act.
How do you think President Trump is doing?
I think he's doing well, and I think what he did today showed real leadership. I think it showed courage, and I commend him for doing this. I commend him also for moving in a direction of transferring power back to the American people. It's one of the things he said in his inaugural address that gave me great comfort and something that's been borne out by his actions since then. He said this is about a transfer of power, not just from one president to another or one party to another. It's about a transfer of power from Washington, D.C. back to the American people. I'm excited about that, and I appreciate his leadership.
All right. You're always mentioned in a small pool of potential candidates for the Supreme Court, the next one that comes up. You interested?
Look, I'm a lifelong law geek. I started watching Supreme Court arguments for fun when I was 10 years old.
You can't out-nerd me or geek.
You're law. Of course. Right. If the President of the United States asked me to consider that, of course I would.
But so is your brother, right?
Sure. We both look good in black. But, in the meantime, I've got a job in the Senate that I'm focused on. But if the President asked me to consider that, absolutely I would.
You know how the world works and perceptions become reality. And I've been reading a great deal of the foreign press and breaks here, Senator, and the feeling seems to be, whether it's coming from Germany, who indicated Angela Merkel on the wires right now, I'll still do what I can. Germany will still do what it can. The mayor of Paris, the French president, so many more saying this was regrettable, but they're shaking their heads. We'll move on without America. Now, I know your view is this was in the interest of America, but do you worry that we are now an island and that we could, for maybe perfectly fine reasons, be alienating our friends?
No. Look, we're the leader of the free world. We are the leader of the world's economy. And we are the leader of the world when it comes to protecting the environment. We've got some of the strongest environmental rules and laws in the entire world. And
but the president has been nixing a lot of those through executive order, which might explain, I misquoted here, Angela Merkel's comments that she regrets the U.S. climate move, but will keep working to save our Earth, insinuating clearly that the president is not.
So what, we're going to start taking moral lectures from the Germans now? We're going to start letting foreign leaders in Europe and other parts of the world dictate our domestic policy? I don't think that's a good idea, especially when we've been a world leader in cleaning up the environment.
All right, finally, your sense of the makeup right now in the battle of 2018 doesn't seem that far away. I know you don't sort of get knee-deep in all this politics stuff, but that the decisions such as these, that haven't been polled, obviously, but that you need the economy really picking up steam. You need these tax cuts to go through, the health care rework to go through, and yet Republicans can't seem to get that to go through. Are you guys just not able to lead?
We are able. We're going to pass those things because we have to pass those things.
I know that,
the
but
consequences
it hasn't
will be too
happened,
dire to not just us as a party, not just the elected leadership and membership of the Congress as currently constituted, but to the entire country. We cannot fail. We have to do this. We have to repeal Obamacare. We
everyone
have to
doesn't
pass
seem to
tax
be on the
reform.
same page on that. There's little wiggle room in the Senate. I understand, Senator, but they're having trouble doing that. And I'm wondering if it's... Do you ever bang heads in private meetings and just say, guys, we're losing it here?
Constantly, every day, happens all the time. But I believe in something Winston Churchill said. The American people can always be counted on to do the right thing after they've exhausted every other alternative. We've given the Affordable Care Act a nice long 7-year try. It hasn't worked. We've exhausted every other alternative.
But
we have to
can't
repeal
have
it.
one more failure trying to get this rework done, right?
We can't. We got to do it.
What happens if you don't?
We're not going to fail. We have to do it.
Okay. We'll see what happens. Utah Senator Mike Lee, written out of history, the forgotten founders who fought big government. Very interesting read. We've been here before. We always forget that. We just forgot our roots. All right, we got the Hill's Joe Concha here right now. Good view of the media. You know, I've been flipping around, Joe, before speaking to the Senate, not as I was speaking to the Senate, where a lot of people are saying, all right, this is regrettable, this is bad. Donald Trump is missing the bigger picture here, that it's a big world. He's retreating and all of that. It's one thing to resent being a globalist, but you're resenting the rest of the globe. That's just some of the smattering of views. What do you think?
I think there's a very basic narrative here, Neil, and that is that Trump inherited a deal he didn't like, and now he wants to renegotiate it. It's that simple. And instead now I'm seeing headlines like Fareed Zakaria, CNN, U.S. is retiring from world leadership. Dana Bash, CNN, Mad Libs for conservatives, Trump's Paris speech, Biden imperils U.S. security. So now, as usual, hyperbole is going to go to 11, and everybody's going to overreact when this is a simple matter of somebody wanting to renegotiate a deal that he didn't negotiate in the first place.
But do you think that the way some can play this is that, you know, obviously this is such a wonderful deal. It wouldn't have been a wonderful deal if 190 countries weren't part of it. We stand out for not being, that we're kind of sticking it in the nose of our friends across the globe. How does that play out? Because that's the way, to your point, it is already playing out.
Right. Well, I think that one soundbite that you're going to see over and over again that will resonate with Trump supporters in those states that helped him break down that blue wall, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, quote, I was elected to represent the citizens of Pittsburgh, not Paris. Whoever wrote that, that's good stuff. That is a soundbite that you're going to hear a lot.
I guess he's a Democrat because he says, this is Phil Cavuto, the mayor there, I can assure you that we will follow the guidelines of the Paris Agreement for our people, our economy, and futures. So back and forth we go.
Yeah, I guess Peoria is in Illinois, so that was taken. He was going for alliteration, Neil.
I think understand. No, I got the Pete thing and all that. Finally, the president is just sort of, I noticed he started his remarks talking about all the good news going on because he doesn't like the fake media for not reporting it. So it was very clever how he kind of sucked people in before he got to this whole climate accord thing. How do you think he's doing with the media?
In terms of his messaging?
Yeah.
I think that his team isn't doing a terribly good job. I think in general there's not a lot of organization in terms of Trump's communication team. It's almost like, and I've heard this analogy used before, he has a quarterback that's out in front of his offensive line, and when he should have blockers, he's kind of running on his own, and they're trying to catch up. So he had a very good speech today, I would say. His messaging overall, he's tweeting less. I think that's a good thing because it only seems like that gets him into trouble. But overall, look, there was a Harvard study just recently, Neil, that talked about how Trump only gets 20% positive coverage. He even gets negative coverage in terms of the economy, which is remarkable when you consider most of the major indicators are doing quite well. That shows you there's an agenda and a reflex to the negative. Thanks.
Joe Concha, thank you very, very much. Much more after this. A year after having my chest ripped open, a belated opening up to you and what I learned from that surgery, and a thank you for sticking by me through and after that surgery. Sorry if I might have gotten a little bit emotional here, but apparently it was mutual. Grace Alina in Spring Hill, Florida. You brought me to tears with your closing statement. I don't know you personally, but I'm so thrilled you're still here. Lynn via Comcast.net. You made me cry, so glad you're back. My husband went through the same thing, and it's been 11 years. Good for him. Josh via SPC. The only reason I'm still crying is because you survived. Damn, you're one tough right-wing nut job to kill off. Bob in Simi Valley, California. Neil, this week I too had open heart surgery. My beautiful wife said Neil Cavuto went through this last year, and look how great he looks. It definitely gives me hope. Wishing you the best. And you as well, Bob. Hang in there. Wendy via Comcast. An excellent reminder that none of us are mortal. As an RN who has cared for patients like yourself recuperating from open heart surgery, I've heard many echo your thoughts, but none as eloquent as yours. That's very nice of you. And then there's BEQQ, who tweets, this world is so much better with you in it, so glad you are better, and back to your stinker self. Did you have to say stinker? Anyway, Janie, I know how you felt. I had open heart surgery, 5 bypasses, cardiac arrest, and 6 stents. I am thankful for life. And Gloria You are a hero to me. I must have open heart surgery soon. Not ready to be sliced and diced. Well, there's no way around it. I know where you're coming from, Gloria, but you can and will get through this. And after the slicing and dicing, you'll wear that scar with pride. Just run across the beach like I like to do, because the scar is the least of people's fears. Meanwhile, Marlene and Team Cavuto, you are the highlight of my day. Fair, balanced, smart, funny, and yes, good looking, no matter what the haters say. Don writes, stuck at mechanics with Fox News on TV. Do all those Twitter ditto heads supporting Cavuto actually exist? Kevin in Burlington, Vermont. I think all of those people who say they love you are shut-ins at group homes. BTM via Yahoo. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad you survived and all, Cavuto, but I was kind of hoping you'd stop working, spend all that dough you've been piling up, and just get the hell out of my life. But no, like a plague, you stay. Oh, well. Yeah, oh well. Danny in New Haven, Connecticut. Okay, you survived this hard thing. MS and I guess cancer before that. What do you want, a medal? Just croak already. Your continued TV presence is giving me agita. Really? And Nevadic steps back. Whenever I hear the word avocado, I think Neil Cavuto. No idea why. I don't even watch Fox. Okay. And then were you watching the show yesterday? Kevin on Twitter. Kobe Fifi, Cavuto, just saying. All right, me just worrying. Meanwhile, Elton via Charter. Oh my God, Neil, I was eating dinner when you flashed those images of you in a hospital gown, knowing what those nurses probably saw. They deserve combat pay. Really? So Nancy Pelosi says the new sanctuary cities law in Texas is an act of cowardice. So, not looking after the needs of legal residents and their wallets is an act of bravery? Really? Is it me, or is the whole world turning upside down? Left or right? This is just wrong. Just look at the degree Texas State Representative Matt Rinaldi is getting for dare threatening to call ICE on illegal immigrants who had somehow gotten into the state chamber. Furthermore, holding up signs claiming, I am illegal and here to stay. And now the media is pouncing not on the threats made against him, including from a Democratic colleague who all but pulled a Tony Soprano to say he knows where Rinaldi parks. No, that trigger event isn't the thing getting covered. What is getting covered is Rinaldi's promise to shoot the guy in self-defense if he did. No, Rinaldi is the crazy gun-carrying bigot in an open-carry state. And Texas is the even crazier sanctuary city, killing state, simply because he had lawmakers want to make sure that in Texas, at least, law enforcement agencies in such cities comply with federal immigration guidelines. In other words, follow the law. And if they don't, pay some steep daily fines. Now, if that is cowardly, how is it refusing to call lawbreakers what they are brave? I don't know. All I do know is this has all been going on for a while. Remember these illegals protesting across the street from the White House? The White House! Back in 2014, not a one arrested, not a one even questioned. They weren't hiding who they were. Authorities were too afraid to do what they should. Don't ask, but do tell. We live in an age where illegals can demand rights they do not have, supported by very powerful Democrats ignoring a constitution they do not uphold. When did anti-illegal immigrant become just anti-immigrant? When did shielding those who shouldn't be here take priority over those who already were and are? When did we go from a melting pot to a nation of crackpots? My friends, it is not cowardly to say you're looking out for those here legally. It is cowardly not to. And there is no bravery in ignoring our Constitution. What is cowardly is refusing it even exists. We're a nation of laws, honored by those who respect them, not flaunt them, who value them, not ignore them. Because it is one thing to provide and brag about a sanctuary for people who shouldn't be here. It's quite another to say it's cowardly to look after the very real legal citizens paying the bills here. My heart, it's fluttering.